Welcome to our community. Susie Thomas with you this morning, speaking with Rich DeRosier, who is the new executive editor. Do I have that right?
That's correct.
Of the Canton Repository. And Gary Brown, a familiar name, has been one of their journalists for quite some time. I think of you as the historian.
42 years.
42 years. And we've read so many Monday Afters and are having so much fun as now you're giving us history, this moment in history throughout the 200th anniversary, 200 years of the Canton Repository. Welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate you being here. Rich, let's start with you. You're kind of new on the job, certainly not new to news. Tell us a little bit about you.
Not new to news, not new to the area. I had been at the repository once before for about 9 years, from the mid-'80s to the early 90s, and then left Canton and went to work at the Beacon Journal for almost to the day, 21 years there, and had an opportunity to come back, and it was an offer I couldn't refuse.
And while you were at the Beacon Journal, you still were covering kind of the Canton area, Stark County area.
I went to the Beacon Journal, and one of the first days there, someone was having a tough time trying to figure out where something was in Stark County, and it ended up being in Perry Township. And they said, "Now, is that Canton or Massillon?" I said, "No, it's Perry Township."
Right.
And they said, "Well, what's the difference?" I said, "Well,
Oh, wow.
if you have to ask that, you need my help." So I became Mr. Stark County, and I was Mr. Stark County for 20 years and helped people sort of figure out the very strange geography that we have here.
And like I have said to you before, thank you so much
You're
for
welcome.
that. Yes, give our area great coverage there. Gary, 42 years at the Canton Repository. Before
it's
we
a
get
long
into
time.
that's 42 of the 200 are all you.
Yeah, I need to clear something up. I did not know John Saxon, the founder
Not personally. No, I wouldn't accuse you of that at all. You don't change, you don't age. You still look the same.
You're very kind.
Talk about those early days on the beat.
Well, the early days, it's funny. It pretty much has changed completely. Newspapers hadn't changed for years when I got in there. When I started, we were typing on manual typewriters and editing copy on paper instead of computers, and we sent the copy through pneumatic tubes, just like the department stores, to the composing room and other departments. And within I think it was 5 to 10 years of when I got there, everything started changing.
Yeah. Even how you receive news now, I'm thinking, boy, as an old PR person, the old writing out the news release and mailing it to everyone, then fax changed that. Then emails really changed everything, didn't they?
Yes, it did. It increased the volume of news that we were aware of more quickly.
Right.
Well, and now I think even more Twitter. Because I sometimes feel like I'm getting the news on Twitter before I actually read about it in the repository, because somebody might just tweet something that they're about to write. How has social media changed the game?
Well, it's made it pretty much immediate. You're right when you say somebody has tweeted something before they actually started to write the story. That's exactly true. That's one of the first things you might do, and then you write a more in-depth story for perhaps the website, and Rich can explain this better than I can because he has a more overall view. But then you may write a even more in-depth story for the paper for a second day.
Right. I think it's changed the newspaper product a lot. As you can see, I think the articles in the newspaper now tend to be oftentimes as much looking forward to help people anticipate what's going to happen in their life as much as it is to reflect what has happened. Because most people already know. They've been bombarded with social media or, over the back fence because someone else has heard about it through social media. So the next morning's newspaper can't be news that's 12 or 18 hours old and still be a good product for people. So we try to look ahead with stories, anticipate stories, preview stories, and then even when you are the paper of record, you still a lot of times take a different approach and try to get the interview with someone else, that maybe hasn't been in the news all day, or just take a different angle at something. So the newspaper product itself has really had to adapt.
There will always be people who enjoy sitting down with their paper and coffee, and they need to feel it physically. But much of the paper is now electronic, isn't it? And video has become so important.
Video has become very important. All of our staff shoots their own video. Some of them take their own pictures. A lot of times to go with their story, sometimes just something that they just see independent of a story they're working on. And there's an insatiable appetite for video, for sure.
Yeah. What do you think Saxton would say if he could see the repository today?
I think he'd be proud of it. I think it's still. I think the most important thing, and the thing that attracted me to come back to the repository and the job itself, was that the repository has always had a very deep, very strong connection with the community. And so I think that part of it he'd be really proud of still, and then it's and Gary Gary knows much more about the history and how John Saxton sort of evolved the paper and what was important to him. But I think those things from 200 years ago stand the test of time. The trust, the bridge to the community. I think those are still very strong.
Let's just reiterate, it's not a centennial you're celebrating. It is a bicentennial. I remember when the country went through that and all the ways to celebrate. So we are celebrating the bicentennial of the Canton Repository that went through a lot of names, but we still, call it cantonrep.com is what I think of it now.
We went through a lot of names, but the repository was always a part of the
It's
name.
always been
the
part.
Evening Repository,
Yes.
Daily Repository, Canton Repository, Sunday Repository, but it was always the repository.
Well, these celebrations don't throw themselves. So, Gary, please tell us a little bit about what all went into this year-long celebration, and we've got one more event coming up.
Yeah, we started, it would have been almost 2 years ago now. So you could say it's been a year for each 100 years we've been planning. We started in the spring or early summer of 2014 and had a committee formed, and we decided on some events, and it started with a gala dinner just about this time of last year. And it went on through an artist exhibition at the Saxton Gallery that was entitled Above the Fold. And it continued then with some brown bag talks that a variety of different people, including Rich and I, had given at the repository and other places. And continued through a hot dog event, community event, and an ice cream event downtown. The hot dog event was at the McKinley National Memorial.
Yes, that was
outside.
great.
Yeah, it was. A lot of people said they were tasty.
Yeah.
And a variety of other events, including a vintage fashion show, and Barb Abbott conducted some Canton food tours that were focusing on different restaurants that extended through the history of the repository.
Because the repository has spent the last 200 years covering this community, it's really been a community celebration, hasn't it?
That was stressed right from the very beginning. We wanted it to be involve the community, and that the community would take ownership of the history of the paper, because right from the very start, John Saxton included in his first edition things that would have been important to people in Canton at the time. And it was a frontier town, so there were a lot of agricultural items, but generally it's just the things that dealt with their daily life at the time. So the community has been a part of the paper ever since John Saxton got here.
It's almost a tour through history, a walk through history, to go through the lobby at the repository. Love what you've got there, some just iconic front pages and some of the old equipment. You can talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, those newspapers actually came, we reproduced those and put them up for the 175th anniversary 25 years ago. So they have been around. They were part of an exhibition that was put on at that time. And the Linotype machine is actually one of the several Linotype machines that we use that set the molten type and hot lead type back in the hot metal days.
Wow.
We had 2 banks of them in the composing room. I saw a picture of that just the other day. And so there were several that people sat down and typed and actually set lines of type in the hot metal. And you can see one of those contraptions is kind of a odd-looking thing, but it worked. It did what it was invented to do.
Has there been any time, as you've been going through, oh my gosh, boatloads of old stories and articles throughout the last 200 years, anything that's really surprised you at all?
Not so much surprise, but it's interesting to see that how little things have changed, and that includes the crime that has always existed, of course.
Yeah.
But also, we talk about how it's also different now. In a way, it's just coming in different circles that keep repeating and touching upon things, because our website, we're updating all the time. Well, in the old days, we used to have extra editions. And in a way, the website is just a continuous extra edition, right? That people would continue, they would continue looking at the extra editions for larger events. Granted, we update it for most everything now, but it's interesting to see that we've really gone back to doing things in the old way, where we try and give the latest news, only we do it with better
electronic,
technology.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? Yeah, and almost that you get it early. You'll see a story, but by the time you read it in the physical paper, there's been some added to it. There's more information, and then the next day you might even see it back on the website again with some additional information. You kind of have to read something more than once, don't you?
We hope people read it at least once, and more than once is even better.
And also, Rich, it's not just a physical paper. There are other products that the repository does as well. You've got the About magazine. You've got all these things that all go together. The business is, as much as it changes, it stays the same and yet continues to change.
It's always evolving. We're constantly looking for either special sections or special products to try to fill a need. About magazine's probably been the most successful of those. There's a couple of other publications within the magazine division. We'll have a special section at the end of this month commemorating the end of the 200th anniversary ride. We've had every month for the last 9 months a focus on a particular community inside of Stark County. At the end of this month, we're going to wrap all of those. We're going to end the month with a look at Canton. That's going to be our final individual community, but then also we're going to repackage some of the ones we've already done and create almost a keepsake book of, this is our community. Again, going back to that whole idea that John Saxton introduced about the paper being a conduit for the community to communicate. We're going to pull all of those special community sections into one keepsake for the end of this month, so that's something to look forward to.
Very much. And I think of folks from the area who now may have moved away. They're all still celebrating with you, Everyone's keeping up with it online. You see so many comments for people who, this was my hometown, how cool to see this. So the repository and his original vision of community news is much broader community, isn't it?
Absolutely, and one of the highlights, I think, of the last installment of the 200th anniversary editions is several of the pages are going to be devoted to people telling us what the newspaper means to them. So we put out a call in the paper and on Facebook and through Twitter, what does the repository mean to you? And we're starting to get responses back on those. And I saw one this morning that really touched me. It's just a 3-generation, how a grandfather shares the newspaper with his grandson. So that was really heartwarming to read that it means so much to that family.
Very cool. All right, we're going to have to take a break. We'll be back with more. Thanks so much to Gary Brown, Rich DeRosier, for being with us this morning. And stay tuned. There's more of Our Community.